So as New York shrinks and upstate shrinks, by definition, the districts grow. So I have one of the largest districts in the east of the Mississippi. And I had a feeling with this next census, it may even, who knows, it may even get bigger or stranger. So it's hard to cover. But I announced I was going to run for Congress in probably the shortest time of anybody, or one of the shortest in the country, 5.5 months. And I built and worked on entire shopping malls in a year. And I thought, well, hell, you ought to be able to build a congressional campaign in 5 months. And boy, that was a mistake. But I worked hard and got out there and spent a lot of my own money. And we actually outraised our opponent locally, because a lot of people know me, a lot of people knew what I was capable of. And at the end of the day, we were outspent by $600,000, and we had the closest race against an incumbent in the entire United States, which is not a thrill to be the #1 loser in the country, but it's what it was. It was the best consolation prize I could walk away with. And none of that's the reason I'm doing it again, other than, I mean, being close is not a reason for people to either vote for me or care whether I'm elected, but it made me believe that maybe I had something to offer, maybe I had some appeal that I could earn this seat with, and that every reason that I decided to run was even more prominent now than it was then. And the reason I said that I don't rail against anybody, and I kind of generally complain about everybody in government, is that I'm not a guy who talks nasty about Nancy Pelosi or my opponent, or it's not on my mind to do that. I have a unique set of skills and ideas, and I try to bring those to the table and talk about those more, and realize that at the end of the day, what we all want are solutions that last not 2 years or 4 years or 10, but for generations. And that's the thing that we typically don't get from government and from our officials today, because so many people are invested in, you could call it the election cycle. It's actually like a business cycle, and that there is an enormous amount of pressure on incumbents to not just pander, but to maneuver and to work hard to be reelected. And I think in the process we lose governance. We lose tough decisions to the process. I mean, at the very time when everybody in this room, depending on who you talk to, you may owe someplace in current account deficit of 40-something thousand per person, all the way up to as much as, if you go to the Peterson Foundation, they would say you owe close to $180,000 or $200,000. You people will do. I'll be dead, so it won't. Somebody's going to pay it, and that's an enormous burden. And what it does for you guys and everybody, and my kids, is in a very real way, it limits your opportunities in life. It straps you with a debt that you didn't assume, that you didn't make for something you didn't necessarily get. And that's really immoral, if you think about it. That the generation that I'm part of, and this is what I think has a legitimate complaint, it would be a legitimate complaint for young people to make today, and that is that guys like people my age and other people generally are kind of spent their parents' money, they spent their money, and now they're borrowing yours. And you people don't have jobs, by and large. You haven't built your career. That's what you're doing here. That's your job now, is to prepare. And that should be a real source of anxiety for you, because you shouldn't start. It's one thing to start out life at zero. It's quite another thing to start out life with a whole set of institutions that are stacked against you. I mean, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all of these things are have structural problems, and our gross domestic product isn't growing at a rate that's big enough to handle them, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Right now it's maybe 1.5%, 2% max. Maybe it'll grow to 3 or 4, but it doesn't look like it's going to grow to 6 or 8 or 9 like it has after other kind of downturns or recessions. And that should be a real concern. So that's why the debt is a problem. You should remember, there's nothing complicated. Everything you learn, maybe, and you hear on the news and on TV, and all the talking heads and the mean-spirited kind of nasty people from the right, and the ethereal and idealistic people on the left, Um, what you should realize, though, is that the takeaway for me is always that the deficits that we talk about are a symptom of a disease, and the disease is structural spending that's out of control that we can't sustain. And there are tipping points. You've all read the tipping point, but there are tipping points in the world, and one of them is the amount of money government can take out of a society and still have a successful private sector. And whether we like to think about it or not, the business of America is business, and 80 or 70% of all the jobs that you'll be looking for when you leave here will be provided by hopefully the private sector, and that 60% of the economy is born around the consumer, and that without a successful and thriving private sector, government can't do what it needs to do, and our economy can't grow, and you're really trading future growth for present prosperity. That's another simple way to look at it, is somebody is trading something of yours for something of theirs. And maybe that works in the short run because we can tax and we can kind of hope to grow our way out of it. But in the long run, it's not sustainable when you build structural problems in your economy that when you sign on to them, like in 1935 with Social Security, in 1964 with Medicare. At the time they made sense. But when you keep adding to these programs and expecting more out of them, I would suggest to you another quick takeaway is that we haven't, that the free enterprise system hasn't let us down. We've just simply expected too much of it. We've let it down. And we're ultimately killing the goose. And a simple metaphor to look at it is that just too many people in the cart and not enough people pulling it. There was something like, I don't know, it was in the 30s, 34 maybe, Social Security, and now, when it started, and now it's down to just a handful. I think it's maybe 3.5, 4, something like that. And those kind of models are unsustainable. For Social Security in particular, the money gets borrowed out by the government, and yeah, they've never defaulted on any debt, and yeah, maybe there's enough money to pay it back till 2037. But the reality is that this is the first year in the history of this country, 2010, when it actually flipped, when there's more money going out than there is coming in. And that's a function of unemployment, people retiring early, people living longer, all of those things. So what you want, I think, out of leadership is not to tell you what you want to hear, not to give you what you need, not to trade short-term benefits for long-term nightmares, but to say, we're doing something that's not sustainable. How can we fix it? I mean, sacrifice is not a dirty word, but it becomes a dirty word when you put it off so far that a single group of people feels themselves in the panic that so many people do today. I know, I'm 59, so I'm pretty old, and a lot of people my age, I've never met anybody who wouldn't trade their life for their kids or their future for their kids, or wouldn't say that the child they have or the person they know who's young is worth more than they are. That may sound idealistic, but it's really true. And right now, we're putting ourselves in a position, I think, where these kind of unsustainable structures that we've built are being given to you guys, and you should be in somewhat of a lurch over it as a collective. I certainly would be, and I think there's people like me that are trying to not speak just for you, but just speak about the whole kind of loss of opportunity in this that you've seen in New York and throughout the country. Unemployment's 9.6%. Underemployment is someplace between 17 and 20. Minority employment is in the maybe closer to 20s or 30s, 25 to 30. So there's a lot wrong. And the thing that's interesting about it, and we're sitting in a nice warm room that's well lit and a beautiful campus,